Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the 2022-2023 School Partner Information Session. I'm Tiffany Watson, the director of the Edward J. Lewis II Lawyers in the Classroom program. Thank you again for joining me. So for today, we will be covering a few things. Our session agenda is as follows. We have a welcome and introduction. We're going to talk about the mission of the organization that supports the Lawyers in the Classroom program. We're going to talk about the program introduction. So we'll talk about the components, the curriculum, our learning standards, administration, in-person visits, virtual visits, the role of the teacher. I have a few FAQs. We're actually going to go over a couple of lessons and then next steps and any questions you have. Just for your knowledge, as I'm presenting the lesson, you will be muted. At the end of this presentation, you certainly can present your questions in the chat, and I'm happy to answer those questions. If for some reason you have questions following the session, you can certainly send me an email, and that information will be provided at the end of this presentation. So thank you again. Alrighty, so as I mentioned, my name is Tiffany Watson. I am the Lawyers in the Classroom director. I am a 10-year educator. So I've been in education for over 10 years. I've taught elementary and middle school and high school. And I was also a former administrator. And I've been leading this program, the Lawyers in the Classroom program, for about 5 years. And with my role as director, I do deliver and develop and update Lawyers in the Classroom curriculum. I do coordinate and solidify the LIC classroom visits. I of course, recruit teachers, thank you for coming, and attorneys and law students to be a part of this program, and I'm very proud of it. The most important thing that I want to share too is that I'm very passionate about civic education and making sure that civic lessons get to our students across the Chicagoland area. So the Chicago Bar Association's 501c3. So I wanted to share the mission of the organization as we move forward into learning more about the Lawyers in the Classroom program. So I understand a lot of teachers that signed up for this session are new. So I definitely wanted to help them understand what the mission of the organization is, as well as understanding what the program does, of course. So the Chicago Bar Association's Media and Civic Education, Inc. is the CBA's nonprofit, and that does support the Lawyers in the Classroom program, and it has been supporting the Lawyers in the Classroom program since 2019. Our mission is to offer educational programming to help Chicago area students better understand our Constitution and the nation's legal system, instill knowledge of their rights and responsibilities as U.S. citizens, and bring awareness to racial injustice, racial equity, and restorative justice principles. So that is our mission. So again, this organization is the Chicago Bar Association's 501c3, which is our charitable entity. I think some people kind of get us confused with Chicago Bar Foundation, which is the sister organization to the CBA, but the Lawyers in the Classroom program sits underneath the CBA's 501c3 charitable entity. And our focus is to deliver really substantive educational programming to our students across the Chicagoland area. Now, about the Lawyers in the Classroom program, my beloved, it was originally created and originated with the Constitutional Rights Foundation Chicago. So it has been around for quite some time, since 1974, and it was renamed the Edward J. Lewis Lawyers in the Classroom program in 2007. And it was named after a brilliant, charismatic, and very dedicated lawyer, and very, very dedicated to students in the Chicagoland area, Edward J. Lewis II. And so Edward, in the early 90s, he recruited 100 volunteer attorneys at a firm that he was a partner, Jenner Block, and he went to Pickard Elementary in Chicago. And since then, it has blossomed into this huge program over so many years, with 600 attorney volunteers who participate in this program each year, who really want to give back to the community and really want to teach students civics. So I'm really proud that the program is named after Edward, because he was very serious about teaching civics in Chicago classrooms, and he was very serious about giving back to the community. So more information about the Lawyers in the Classroom program. So, of course, everyone knows in 2019, the Illinois State Senate approved a House bill requiring all Illinois middle schools that serve 6th, 7th, and 8th grade to provide a civics class for students. What's important to note about the Lawyers in the Classroom program is that it uses grade level specific curriculum to teach students their constitutional rights beginning at the 2nd grade level. So we definitely go to 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, but our lessons, our civic lessons begin at 2nd grade. And so ultimately, the program consists of attorneys and law student volunteers from firms, federal organizations, corporations, and even law schools, visiting 2nd through 8th grade classrooms, using our 2nd through 8th grade curriculum to teach students their constitutional rights, bring awareness to racial injustice and racial equity principles, and provide those relatable examples, interactive examples that students can connect to and actually use in their life. And so they do take our curriculum into the classroom, teach the students civics, and it's been a very rewarding experience, not only for attorneys, but obviously for our students. And me, having witnessed so many of the visits, I'm really pleased with how well the students connect to the lessons and the information. Now, we have more than 50 partnerships with law firms, corporations, federal organizations, and law schools. So we've been doing this for quite some time, and really proud that we've sustained these partnerships, and these attorneys and law students are really excited about getting into the classroom and teaching students their rights. So more information about the program. Again, especially for individuals that are new, and I did see quite a few schools sign up that were new to the program. I'm very, very excited about that. So the Lawyers in the Classroom curriculum is designed for 2nd through 8th grade social science, civics, and literature classes. Attorney volunteers, they go to the classrooms, as I mentioned, and they do visit the classrooms about 3 times over the course of the school year. So we create a schedule over the course of the school year that works with the attorney and the teacher, and they visit the classroom 3 times. Now, are they able to visit more than 1 time? Yes, they are, and that is something that the attorney and the teacher will discuss. But ultimately, as part of this volunteer program that is provided to the community through the Chicago Bar Association, we just ask attorneys to visit the classroom 3 times. Definitely, there have been times where attorneys do visit more than once. Lots of teams, in fact, really like going pretty often, but we ask them to go at least 3 times over the course of the school year. Now, the program itself, the program and the curriculum, what's really, really important is that it invokes students' critical thinking skills. And so they're able to find their social justice voice, and they're able to really have that civil discourse in the classroom with the students, that their classmates, and actually discuss really controversial issues that connect to their daily lives and also to the world around them. This program offers positive adult role models, as you know, you being an adult role model, you are very, I know that you can connect to this, but also having an attorney or a legal expert in the room where students have so many questions about what's going on in the world, especially in such a very high political climate currently. But they're able to ask students, I'm sorry, they're able to ask attorneys questions and really connect to them in a professional and academic way. And so that is those are the things that also we really pride ourselves in as it relates to this program. Now, we do visit about 60 schools each year and reach about 3,000 to 5,000 students per year. And we have about 600 attorneys and law volunteers, law student volunteers that participate in this program. And so approximately 52% of our LIC partner schools are in underserved Chicago communities. And while it is so important that our underserved communities receive civic education and education in general, I want to stress that this program is for everyone. Affluent and underserved communities need the civic education because these discussions are really important. These controversial issues are really important for students to talk about, to discuss, to think about, and really allow them to think how they can be civically engaged now and in the future. Program component. So our curriculum, as I mentioned, we have several lessons. We have 3 lessons at the 2nd through 3rd grade level. We have 4 lessons at the 4th through 6th grade level, and we have 13 lessons at the 7th through 8th grade level. Now, we have some lessons that will likely be coming in the fall, new lessons, but this past year, we actually implemented 4 new lessons at the 7th and 8th grade level, which is why we have 13 lessons at the 7th and 8th grade level. Some of the topics that are included across our curriculum are the letter the law versus, I'm sorry, the letter of the law versus the intent of the law, devising clear and fair laws, the need for rules and how they affect people. We definitely talk about mediating conflict, and that's at the lower elementary level. But definitely there's opportunities for students to talk about conflict and have that civil discourse at the 7th and 8th grade level for sure, because students are in front of each other creating arguments and counter arguments regularly with our curriculum. They talk about the Bill of Rights. We talk about the jury selection process. We definitely focus on the Tinker v. Des Moines case. That is one of our lessons, which focuses on the freedom of speech and freedom of expression. We have the free exercise clause and religious rights, which is not only through the Wisconsin versus Youder case, but we also have a sacred blade lesson that also discusses religious rights. We talk about one of our new lessons is on voting rights and voter suppression. Hate speech versus free speech. We have the Breonna Taylor case in the Fourth Amendment, which is a new lesson, and the right to assemble, which is also a new lesson. And so we have quite a few topics that are very inclusive of the things that our students are experiencing, seeing, and have questions about. And so these are some of the topics that our students definitely connect to and will be reviewing with our curriculum. And so our learning standards, I definitely wanted to touch on, some of the learning standards that our curriculum connects to and complies with. So we know that the House bill that was put into effect, that we satisfy that civic bill that came into effect in 2019, and that, we obviously work on with our lessons. There's a great deal of focus on civil discourse, but also very much do we have lots of simulations, and we talk about democratic processes. But also, the students learn about enforcing laws and protecting citizens. They certainly learn about constructing arguments, as I've mentioned a few times, and counterclaims. And citing textual evidence is so important to me. As a former teacher, that was something that I, was very adamant about in the classroom. And I know that as teachers yourselves, you feel the same way about citing textual evidence, because that is how students are able to critically think, create arguments, whether it's in writing or, just in their head. But I always had students write things down and make those connections. And so these are some of the learning standards that are very much a part of our curriculum, and just really pleased to share with you all so that you know that this program very much fits with Illinois state standards. And so administration. So this 2022-2023 school year, I wanted to share kind of how the program is going to be administered. The Lawyers in the Classroom program, over the last 2 years, there's been a change, obviously, in 2020. In 2021, there was more remote, and now we've opened up to more in-person visits where attorneys visit the classrooms in person. And so this year, we wanted to make sure that everyone was continuing to remain comfortable, considering our comfort levels are different. So the Lawyers in the Classroom will definitely be a hybrid program where volunteers are able to visit in person as well as virtually. So there is a remote option, but definitely attorneys are allowed to go into the classrooms in person. And that is something that you would be speaking with your partner attorney about, in terms of their comfort level. So it's really important that you have that relationship with your partner attorney or attorney team. I want to also really stress that the Lawyers in the Classroom program is an approved Chicago Public Schools program. I'm very happy to say that. And it has been approved for many years, obviously, since it's been around for 30 years. But I want to also stress that because each time an attorney goes into the classroom, volunteers do have to complete the CPS application form. So I am aware that the CPS application form has to be completed, and I make attorney volunteers very much aware of that. And I also make sure that they have that information prior to going into the classroom. So they do get a link for completing that application. I do get the approval letters, and I do keep those and retain those. So if an administrator or a teacher needs those approval letters, I'm happy to provide those prior to the visits or whenever is necessary. Our volunteers are considered level 2 volunteers, so that's really important to note. This year, we were just informed as a CPS partner that volunteers do have to document their visit hours, their classroom visit hours online. And so that is something that I am going to be sharing with attorney volunteers as we do a training session next month. So they will have to log their volunteer hours. And I would ask that if they are not able to log them on their smartphones, that if they could possibly log them in on your computer, as that was kind of the instructions I was provided during our training session about, the new kind of setup that CPS is expecting when it comes to logging hours for attorneys or I'm sorry, volunteers in general. So volunteers in general for CPS are required to log their visit hours, and I will be asking them to use their smartphones, as that's an option. But if they're not able to do that, they may need to use a computer in your classroom. So I just wanted to give that information. Now moving forward, so any school partners, I know there's a few school partners who are joining us today that have been a part of this program for several years. So returning school partners and attorney volunteers have been asked to confirm their participation. Many of you have received emails to confirm, and I'm really thankful to those of you who have responded. I understand this has been a really busy week. I know this is your first week back, so I will continue to reach out and follow up. So definitely take your time. Once that's confirmed, I do request your grade level information, because I know teachers move from different grade levels across, different years. Every year you may teach a different grade level, and your class schedule, class sizes, and any available dates that you have for attorneys to visit. So that information is necessary for me to move forward with scheduling your visits, your lawyers in the classroom visits. Now, there are law firms that have longstanding partnerships with some schools that may sometimes they will reach out to me, but also initially reach out to you about coordinating those visits, and that's totally fine. I definitely just need to be kept in the loop as to when your visits will be, and making sure that if you need anything as it relates to any information, I'm here to assist. But ultimately, I do connect the attorney partners with you, the school partners, and coordinate the visits. So moving forward, any new school partners, I do have email addresses, and I'm reaching out to new school partners so that we can get the following information, which is your grade level information. So what grade level you're teaching, which class sizes, and if there's multiple teachers at your school that are interested in being a part of the Lawyers in the Classroom program, please definitely share their information. And then we begin scheduling based on the attorneys that I match you with or place you with, and we coordinate your visits. So that's ultimately kind of the administration. I just wanted to make sure everyone knew that we are an approved program and have been, and that, we are moving forward. My hope is that we can get all of the information that we need from our school partners as soon as possible, so that we can schedule our visits. And I totally understand your schedules are still, some of your schedules are being worked out. So happy to work with you and excited about the new school year. So school visits for this year. Attorneys have been made aware that they're responsible for making copies of handouts if they're visiting in person. There may be some things may vary where they're unable to on some point. So if that happens, we will definitely figure out how copies need to be made. If you're able to, then that's great. But I'm always able to lend a hand if that's necessary, of course. But I wanted you to be aware that attorneys know that they have to bring the copies of handouts to the classroom for the visits. Remote copies of lessons and handouts are on our Google Drive. And that is, and I will show you that shortly, but all of our lessons are remote. All of our lessons have remote copies. So, they're there for handouts and any information you need. Another really important thing about our program is that in order for us to assess the knowledge of the students post lesson, so making sure that students are retaining, learning the information that the attorneys are teaching, and making sure that this program is being administered in a way that is effective. We have reflection forms, right? So we have reflection forms for attorneys, teachers, as well as students. And so we ask that attorneys complete reflection forms, and we really ask that teachers do the same. And students, they actually have a reflection form, of course, that they've had for many years that they complete. And it's just a few brief reflection questions, but I've also added a assessment. So for each one of our lessons, we actually have a student assessment form, which is really like a multiple choice quiz. And that's just us trying to assess what the students learned from the lesson. We obviously are teaching some concepts here in civic education that are important for students to really understand, and we want to be able to track their knowledge around these concepts. So having the assessment form and the reflection form from the student are really important, and we really, really appreciate teacher feedback and thoughts. So if you could kindly complete your teacher reflection form following every single visit, that would be really great, and I'll make sure to give you the link or send you well, teachers have a link to complete the form. There's no paper form. And so that will be sent to you each time you have a visit. So thank you very much in advance for completing those reflections. And I know that's additional paperwork, but it's something that we actually really need for the administration of the program. Now, virtual visits are via Google Meet, and I'm really, this is obviously something that we've been doing for the last couple of years since the start of the pandemic. Again, this is definitely the choice of the attorneys and the teacher. That's a joint, discussion that you would have about what you're comfortable with. So we have Google Meet, and that is what we've been using for the last 2 years. In order for the attorney to teach the class in your classroom, they would need you, the teacher, to provide the Google Meet link. So if you provide that, that would be great. At least a day or two before would be great. Sometimes I know with so much going on, we have to provide the link, the day of, but sometimes attorneys do kind of want that as soon as possible. So I just wanted to share that. And the lessons are in our Google Drive. And so these are the lessons that I was just mentioning that are available. And, they are available for attorneys and teachers to look at and to use and to utilize on the screen. Again, reflection forms are available for all participants of this program. And that's what I wanted to share. So we use Google Meet for virtual lessons, and we use our Google Drive, which has all of our lessons stored for attorneys to use. A really important part of this is that we do have test runs for virtual visits. So a test run ultimately is when we set up a time prior to your scheduled visit to make sure that there's no issues with the internet, no issues with Google Meet, no issues with getting onto the drive. Sometimes attorneys who work in corporations have, firewalls and things that we need to figure out prior to getting, to connecting with us on Google Meet. And so we want to make sure all of those issues are fixed or mitigated so that there are no issues on the day of the visit. So I do schedule a test run for any virtual visits. And you do have access to our digital lessons and digital reflection forms and assessment forms as well. So the role of the teacher. Here are just a few helpful hints when it comes to partnering with your attorney volunteer. So it's really good. So before the volunteer lawyer visits the classroom, it's a really good idea to connect with that attorney. So you will be connected with your attorney volunteer, obviously, when we're coordinating the visits, and I solidify those dates and times that the attorney will be visiting. So you will have their contact information prior to them coming to your classroom. And so connecting with them once those dates are solidified to discuss the lesson that you'd like them to teach and discuss some ways that they can impart the lesson is really important. So you can kind of get to know them, get to know each other, and reviewing the lesson scheduled for the visit before the visit happens. So if you review the lesson and you connect with the attorney, and you can go back to the attorney and ask any questions that you might have about the curriculum, or you can even also reach out to me if you have any questions. It's a good idea to do that. Ultimately, I'm saying connect with your partner attorney or partner attorney team so that you kind of know what's going to happen on the day of the visit. A good idea to do is to prepare your students by telling them that the attorneys are coming. And for the most part, I know once they've come one time, I've heard that, students are really excited and they keep asking about, when is the attorney coming? When is the attorney coming? So I know it's exciting for them to hear that attorney volunteers are coming. It's a good idea to create a nameplate for our students, for the students in the classroom, just so that the attorneys are saying, "I'm sorry, what's your name?" Or they're not asking the student's name constantly, and they have the nameplates and they can actually address the students by their first name. If the activity involves small groups, it's a good idea to, again, you can talk with the attorney about their thinking around the groupings. But obviously, the classroom well, your students well. So grouping the students ahead of time is a good idea. You can also do those Google groups, the grouping when on Google Meet, so that the students can work in small groups. And in some cases, if you're not comfortable with the Google Rooms, I would say that's totally fine. You can certainly have, have a whole group discussion if you're virtual and you're not feeling comfortable about making small groups. But if you're in person, for sure, I would suggest having those groups devised prior to the attorney visiting. And then having students think of any questions you have, because at the end of the lesson, once they're done teaching the lesson, there should be a few minutes, maybe 1 to 3 minutes time to answer any questions. So the students like to ask about what type of law the attorneys practice, and maybe any of their experiences with law school, things of that sort. So it's a good opportunity for them to have a few questions written down. And then before the lawyer visits the classroom, you can remind them of their class size, your class size, and the student's age, and kind of their knowledge around some of these subjects. Maybe even if you've gone over the Bill of Rights in your classroom, or if you're working towards the Constitution test, that's an opportunity for you to share that with the attorney and let them know kind of what you're preparing for or what you're aiming for with your students this year. Explain the amount of time that you have. Our lessons are typically 1 hour. And with so much interaction, sometimes the lessons can go beyond an hour, but they're supposed to be 1 hour lessons. If you have any physical, a group of students or students that need any type of arrangements or anything, you can definitely let the attorney know. That's really important. You can identify topics that may not be a good idea to avoid. If there's information that, we do have lessons that do talk about race, with our lesson on free speech versus hate speech and our Breonna Taylor lesson. So if there's content that you feel that you need to discuss with the students prior, it's a good idea to have that discussion, have just a honest discussion with the students. Again, that comes with reviewing the lesson and thinking about things that you think you need to discuss with the students prior to the attorney visiting. And then it's a good idea, because sometimes, not every, if you haven't been to a school before, attorneys may not know where to go when they're coming into the school. So it's a good idea to give them kind of instructions on where to go into the school. And sometimes a lot of our CPS schools are pretty huge. So not knowing where to go, I, as the director, would definitely share with them that going to the main office is the first place to go. But notifying, maybe the main office that they're coming and perhaps escorting them to the classroom, maybe the first time, is a good idea. But definitely letting the school know that you have a visitor, having an attorney volunteer coming, and making sure that they know where they're going is really important. And then just a few more hints about, since you as the teacher and know your students best, it's really important to really remain engaged during the course of the lesson. So engage with the attorney volunteers during the lesson. Unless there's some type of conversation that the attorney has with you about them wanting to focus on, them only teaching the lesson. It's a partnership, and we really want attorneys and volunteers to work together in the classroom. So I just would encourage engagement throughout the entire lesson with you and the attorney. Also, just to keep in mind that not all attorneys have experience with students in the classroom, and so they may need assistance, and not all of them have experience with teaching, obviously at the middle school or elementary school level. They have the legal knowledge and know, a lot of the, they know the legal terms, but may need some assistance with knowing what needs to be written on the board. Our curriculum clearly outlines like the procedure as to what should be done so that the students can understand instructions and connect to the materials. But you may need to help with writing things down. You may need to intervene on some language, ask to explain more things or explain things for students to understand. So that's why engagement is really important. Clarifying vocabulary and any legal terms. Of course, the attorney will have the legal terms that they can likely clarify, but if you have any, other examples that may help connect the students to any of the terms or vocabulary, that's really, really good. Comprehension questions, obviously our program is really focused on the civics aspect, but also, making sure that we have a mix of real, questions that allow students to really think. So helping to continue to ask those questions throughout the classroom when we're going through a lesson, when the attorney's going through the lesson, is really important. And then also the lessons the students really get engaged, and they really sink into the knowledge that the lessons provide. So you as the leader of the classroom, it's really good to help keep the lesson, move it along. So again, you as the teacher, your students, and what is needed in the classroom. So it's really important for you to, be present and assist with the attorney and their teaching. So here are a few questions that I put together based on kind of the interactions I've had with teachers and attorneys, as well as the survey that I presented to our teachers. And I just wanted to get those questions out there just in case anyone was thinking them, and maybe even if you had them uh, for the end of this presentation. But our attorney classrooms, our attorneys classroom speakers. That was one of the things, because I think sometimes with the attorneys coming, they may be considered speakers. They are speakers as it relates to what they are for CPS volunteers, but they are for this program, this volunteer program, teaching a lesson. So they're there to teach students their constitutional rights, and they have decided to volunteer to be a part of this program because they feel that civic education is really important. Can you review your current curriculum and select LIC lessons that work with what you're teaching? Absolutely. So that's great, because that further supports students' understanding of the concepts of civic education. And so you absolutely can do that. When it comes to any teaching strategies, I kind of reviewed that. Should I expect students to have attorneys to have those skills? As I said, attorneys, we do have quite a few attorneys that do have teaching backgrounds, and a lot of them are law professors, and some actually came from classrooms. Like, we have a few attorneys that actually taught or were social workers, so that's really great. But not all of them have worked in classrooms, and so they may not be accustomed to a classroom environment. So it's a good idea to kind of help them with the board, help them with any questions they have, maybe talk to them about kind of your classroom culture, and making sure that they understand, kind of the environment prior to them coming to the classroom. If you have questions about the Lawyers in the Classroom visits or anything, you can certainly contact me at any point. Um, I'm available by email very, very quickly because I answer those emails pretty quickly. But you can certainly reach me at the number provided here. Talked about being hands-on on the lesson. It's very important that we remain engaged. Again, speak to your volunteer attorney about the lesson and your role. And again, this is really about a partnership, and we're really excited to be working with each of you and excited about the school year. So um, as I mentioned, we have quite a few lessons that were new that were implemented into our curriculum last year. And we implemented these 4 lessons: free speech versus hate speech, voting rights, the right to vote, freedom of assembly lesson, and then the Breonna Taylor and the Fourth Amendment lesson. Um, Today, we're actually going to review 2 lessons before we close out today. And the first is free speech versus hate speech lesson. And the second is the no weapons allowed lesson. So to begin, I want to say that this lesson has been adapted. Again, it is a new lesson, and it is a lesson that has a hard copy. I've adapted it to the virtual version. The virtual version is in our Google Drive, our LSU Google Drive. The objectives for this lesson are to understand the limitations of free speech, to practice taking context into consideration when evaluating the content of speech, and then understanding the First Amendment prevents governmental restrictions of free speech, but does not prevent private restrictions. So these are the objectives that are actually laid out for the teacher and attorney to review prior to actually imparting the lesson. And so the way in which this lesson would be administered would be, if it were virtual, we would start with the same that we would if it were in person. You would take a minute to answer the question, what does the First Amendment protect? So that's kind of the bell ringer question that students would be asked by the attorney teacher partner. And so give them a couple of seconds to think about, what does the First Amendment protect? And then the next part would be, and they would write that down. I would have them write that down. If they were whether it's virtual or in person, it would be a good idea for them to write down their answers. And then they would take a quick quiz, sort of to assess their knowledge. And that's really a matching exercise that attorneys would pass out. And I will show that to you now. And so this is the limitations matching sheet, where the First Amendment, they would have to identify the limitations and talk about, match the letters with the numbers here. Following that, we would review the free speech limitations. So once students would complete that, they review the free speech limitations. And again, that worksheet that I just presented would be passed out to students if it were in person. And you would want to review these, you as well as the attorney volunteer. So the attorney would definitely be reviewing these and discussing these with the students, the limitations of the First Amendment. So clear and present danger, fighting words, libel and slander, obscenity, balancing doctrine, time, place, and manner. So all of these would be reviewed for the students to kind of understand. And then there would be a review of that initial document in which they had to do the matching so that they could decide whether or not they, so we could see what they knew or needed more time to learn. And so following that handout, the attorney teacher would explain that offensive speech It's speech that causes someone to feel hurt, upset, and angry. Offensive speech can evoke these emotions because it is speech that can be insulting, rude, or degrading. And this includes language based on that negatively characterizes people based on their race, their gender orientation, or social class, and other characteristics. Other things that would need to be said in the classroom is remind students that the First Amendment applies to the government and that these freedoms may be restricted to private settings. So this is really important. And again, you would get a copy of this lesson and you would be able to read over this procedure. And another piece that's important is that the virtual version of all of our lessons have instructions also. They have the procedure outlined in each of the slides, just as you would, receive the hard copies. So then we would move on, and the attorney would ask, why do you think these are free speech? Why do you think free speech has these limits? And so we would then talk about the difference between free speech and hate speech. And this is really kind of important. And so answering that question as to why free speech has limits is really important, because we want to get students understanding around, why they think limits need to be imposed upon folks, right? And so then another thing that I really want to point out when it comes to reading handouts in the classroom, and staying engaged, I have here that have students alternate reading and ask for volunteers. So we know as teachers that asking for volunteers keeps the students engaged, the students reading versus the attorney reading the handout. So it's really important that the students participate in reading the handout so that they understand what's happening and so that they get the instructions that are needed, as you know. So that's important to share. So you would read the student handout, ensure students understand that offensive content is protected under the First Amendment when it's in the context that may incite violence. It is not protected. And so that's really kind of the gist of this student handout. And then we would actually go into the actual situation. And again, that handout that I just showed, that would again be passed out to the students, and the students would be reading that as a class. Then we would move into the next handout, which illustrates the expression, that talks about the actual situation that we're talking about for this lesson, which is the Charlottesville right to unite situation that happened in Charlottesville. So I wanted to share that with you. So as we talked about groupings, we talked about how grouping the students prior to the visit is really important. So organizing the class into 3 groups for this particular lesson is really important. So explain that the students in this case will be role playing. So there will be the governor of Virginia, there will be protesters, and there will be counter protesters. And so that explanation around how each group will be given a different mission is important. And then explain to students that governors lead states. This is again another part that attorneys would definitely do. They're leading this lesson, but again, you're partnering with them around the lesson. But it's important to explain to students that governors lead the states and have the ability to implement state laws, and are the commander-in-chief of the state's National Guard. So here is the actual handout. And again, they would read this through and talk about what actually happened. Now, again, there are some language. There's no, I would say there's some language that you would want to discuss with the students prior to the lesson. So it's really important to note that. And just so that they're aware prior to going into the lesson. But that is the handout. And so they would now understand that they're going to organize into groups, and they would begin the role playing. So students role playing as the protesters should come up with reasons why they should be allowed to gather and promote their views. So those that they would stand as the actual protesters in Charlottesville, and then there would be students who are counter protesters who should come up with reasons why this group should not be allowed to gather and promote their views. And then another group would be created for the governor, who would devise a plan for how we could address this rally and event. So these three groups would be really important in giving them, about 5 to 7, maybe 8 minutes to kind of come up with their reasoning to support their particular group, and their views is really important. Again, this was the Unite the Right worksheet that the students would read and keep on hand and continue to look back for information, and for them to continue to connect with their group and talk about what they've been charged with according to whichever group they've been placed in. And then following the read and role play, have students come together as a group to explain their perspective. So it would be orchestrated like a real conversation, direct students to discuss the limitations as it relates to this particular situation. So after they've had their discussion, they present their views. So they would definitely be presenting their views as the protesters, counter protesters, and then as the governor. And you would also want them to talk about the free speech limitations and as it relates to this particular situation. And so the attorneys would be guiding the discussion. You, of course, would be accompanying them and ask the students to think about these specific elements of the situation. So if this speech, is this situation protected? If it is not protected, what point did the rally change from free speech to restricted hate speech? What speech limitations can be applied to this scenario, and why? And would the speech be protected if the context were different? So these are all questions that you would want to present to the students, because they would definitely have I've seen really great conversations being birthed out of these questions. And so this is really important information that the students would be able to connect with and share and discuss. And so after the lesson, kind of after the discussions and after the simulation of the three groups having those discussions, you want to also, the next step for the attorney and you would be to talk about the aftermath of this particular situation. Ensure that students understand that due to the violence that this is unprotected hate speech. And so this is again, another handout that the students would read. And just making sure that they understand that per the Constitution, this would be unprotected hate speech. And so debrief questions are really important. Again, this is a really great lesson because it really allows students to think, dig deep, have that civil discourse, critically think, and really get to understand the role of our governor and the role of our community and our agency. And so this is the opportunity for students to really think about everything that they've kind of discussed and, debrief the lesson with these questions. Would the people who are being assaulted, offended by speech agree that offensive speech should be protected? And so these are really interesting questions for students to dig into. This is actually the part 1 of free speech versus hate speech. So there is 2 more parts of this lesson, and it's really exciting because the students are able to further discuss this idea and this constitutional right, free speech being the constitutional right. Um, so that would be, the free speech versus hate speech lesson. I know we only have a few more minutes left, but our more seasoned lesson is the no weapons allowed lesson. And ultimately, I'm going to quickly go through that so that I can make sure that you have just a few minutes for questions. But ultimately, we would start with the no weapons allowed is a lesson that's at the it's at the 7th through 8th grade level. And the attorney would start with a question: what's the definition of a weapon? And the students would answer that question, and that's the bell ringer question. They would answer that by writing it down. This is also something that can be written on the board for the students, and again, you might have to help with that. And as I mentioned about our virtual lessons, everything is written on the slides for the students to type 1 in the chat to contribute. All of those kind of directions are in our Google Slides. So the next thing would be reading this over. And this is kind of the reason behind this rule of no weapons allowed has been instituted in this particular scenario. So the Fair Law School Board is concerned about safety. And their school and their students, so they've created this no weapons allowed. And so the students at this time in the classroom would be charged with identifying whether or not the particular weapon that's going to be presented in each of the cases following should or should not be allowed to be brought into the school, right? So we have the context. There's increasing violence in schools, and they want to try to control that and make sure that students are being safe. And so then the students would go into, so again, this is an opportunity for students to read and for them to connect to the material versus kind of the attorney to read or the teacher to read. I know teachers don't read for the students. I just want to share that they would need to read this information, and that way they can connect to the lesson. And then the next thing is important is to ask, what does the letter of the law mean and what does the intent of the law mean? So that is what the attorney would be asking the students to gauge their understanding of the lesson. Gauge their understanding of the letter versus the intent. And so that they can talk about, what does no weapons allowed mean? So it's a rule or a law. What does it mean? What is the letter of the law? And then what is the intent? And that is something that is going to be explained by the attorney. So they would explain the letter versus the intent. And they would actually go through the scenarios. I believe there's about 7 scenarios in which the students are able to think about each student and the weapon that's being presented in each of the scenarios and whether or not it should or should not be allowed based on the rule, no weapons allowed. Thinking about the context of why the rule was implemented. So that is what the students are being faced with. In the classroom, students are asked to, the attorney would ask for 5 students to stand and be a part of kind of what's, where they would be doing they would be with students who think that it should be allowed would be go to one side of the room. Students who think it should not be allowed would go to another side of the room, and that's actually called a human graph. And so there would be signs placed on one side of the room. I always like to place one on one side of the room and the other side of the room. Sometimes attorneys place them on the board where it's just a line between the 2 groups of students. Either way, you will know the difference between which students believe that it shouldn't be allowed or should be allowed, and then allow for students to present their arguments. The procedure asks for students who are in the audience to present why they think it should or should not be allowed. But then there's an opportunity for students who are actually standing in the human graph to actually share why they think it should or shouldn't be allowed. So in this case, Aaron is a 5th grade student and he takes the city bus every day. On the bus, he's bullied, it looks like. And so he's scared, so he brings a baseball bat to school, and the scenario says he plans to pull it out to scare students. And so it should not be allowed. Definitely students connect to this scenario because bullying is a part of, unfortunately, what children experience. So there's lots of different views on this particular scenario, but students are able to share why it shouldn't or shouldn't be allowed. Some students point out that the child is only asking to scare the student and not actually going to do anything. So that's a part of like paying attention to what's being said in the text. So allowing students to kind of share and have that civil discourse as to why it should or shouldn't be allowed based on what the law says, the letter of the law, and thinking about the intent of the law. So that's the objective of this lesson, and having students understand the letter versus the intent, having them to critically think about different scenarios as it relates to rules and why rules are devised, and thinking about it in the context of their own lives. All right. So this lesson is very, very close to them, as most of our lessons are. And so they're able to really connect to them very quickly and easily. So I kind of just went over that scenario so that we could kind of understand kind of how our lessons go. But again, there are 7 lessons, and then there are 7 scenarios. And then I wanted to share that we do ask the students to rewrite the no weapons allowed rule, and to make it more clear. So students are asked to be placed in groups. And in this case, as I mentioned, grouping the students prior to the lesson is a good idea to do. So having them put in groups prior to, so when it's time to rewrite the rule, the students go to their groups and they're able to rewrite that rule. And then ultimately they present it to the classroom and explain why it's a more clearly written rule. And so that is the end of the no weapons allowed rule. So they're able to have that civil discourse over the different scenarios, and then they're able to rewrite the rules, rewrite the rule, and present their newly written rule and explain why it's better. So I quickly went over that second lesson. You certainly can contact me if you have any questions about our curriculum, about our lessons, about our administration, anything. But I wanted to make sure that you knew that next steps would be that I will continue to reach out to all of our partners. So our returning school volunteers, you'll continue to get confirmation emails. Any new teacher volunteers, you will be receiving emails about getting this information about available visit dates and class times, the grade level you're teaching, your name, as well as any teachers that are going to be joining you, and then any class sizes information. We definitely need to know class sizes because the attorneys, again, are going to be bringing the handouts, so they need to know how many students. And even if it's virtual, the attorneys do want to know how many students they're going to be in the classroom with, so that they can kind of know how many students they'll be connecting with. All participants, teachers, and attorneys will receive the curriculum, and you have access to the digitized curriculum. If you have any questions, you can certainly email me, twatson@chicagobar.org, and then 312-554-2060 is my number. But I really do appreciate your partnership. I know I'm a few minutes over here. If you have any questions, you can certainly reach out to me. I know that we're a few minutes over, but I can certainly take your questions in the chat if you have any questions. So I'll just watch the chat to see if you have any questions. I do see one that says, will you reach out to us and notify us to put us in contact with the attorneys? Yes. So that was what I mentioned. Once I get your information in terms of your grade level, your scheduling information, your class size information, I will make sure to connect you to your attorney volunteer or attorney volunteer team so that, I can coordinate the visit. So I need to have that information so that I can speak with the attorneys and make sure that it works with their schedule. So as soon as the partnership has been made, you will be connected to your volunteer attorneys. Absolutely. I want to make sure there's no more questions that I missed here. Okay. I think I'm a little bit over. Okay. Yes. The question is, if we were invited to the Zoom, it means that we're signed up for the Lawyers in the Classroom program. That is correct. No problem. Yes, if you're a part of this session, that means you're now part of the Lawyers in the Classroom session, Lawyers in the Classroom program. I'm sorry, and I'm happy to have you as a school partner. And you certainly will receive attorney volunteers to visit your classroom. So I'll just wait a few more seconds because I want to make sure everyone's questions get answered. If you have more questions, you can certainly place them in the chat. Tried to make sure that everyone's questions were answered. I tried to get those questions presented up front in this presentation, but if you have any other questions, feel free to ask them now. Oh, that's so sweet. Ms. McCount said, thank you. Thank you. You're such a great teacher. I really appreciate all of our school partners. I really appreciate you guys being such great teachers, continuing to teach our students. I just really appreciate you guys as partners. And I look forward to such a great year. It looks like we have some more. Yes, good. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. I hope you all have a great weekend. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to me at any point. I'm just excited about this new year. Okay. So again, my email is twatson@chicagobow.org, or you can reach me out at 312-554-2060 if you have additional questions. I just want to make sure I didn't miss any more questions here in the chat. Oh, I have a question in the Q&A. Yeah, answered. In terms of, I guess, Ms. McCount, I do see that you asked the question if you will be paired with the same lawyer last year. I think we spoke about how you wanted another attorney team to visit both of your class, both of your classes, and you wanted the both classes to be covered. So if you want the same attorney to visit, I can certainly make sure that that happens. Otherwise, I'm happy to place you with another attorney. And I think your situation was you wanted one attorney for morning classes and another attorney for afternoon classes. And so I'm happy to provide that. Again, we have lots of attorneys that are interested in this program and continue to stay engaged. So we'll make sure that your classes, your students get what they need. Absolutely. If you have additional questions or want to call me, feel free to do that at any point also. We love you too, Miss McCarthy. Thank you so much. I think I'm going to sign off. It's 1:10. I'm going to give you guys your Friday afternoon back. Thank you all so much. And have a great rest of the day as well as a great weekend. Again, you can reach out to me at any point, twatson@chicagobow.org or 312-554-2060 at your convenience. Thank you all so very much.